The Completed Life Initiative presents Voices of the Completed Life. In each episode, we share unprecedented conversations at the heart of the human experience. Our hosts dive into honest dialogue about mortality, loss, and grief, as we hear firsthand from individuals who seek to avoid life-limiting maladies in a body that may no longer serve them, and who instead aim to celebrate their lives as completed. These are stories that may challenge and surprise you. These stories are worth listening to. These are Voices of the Completed Life.
Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of the Voices of the Completed Life podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Kiskaden-Bechtel, Program Director of the Completed Life Initiative. In today's episode, we interview a member of the Completed Life community, a woman named Sheryl, who reached out to us with her story about her notion of her completed life. Together, we explore the aspects of life that make Sheryl's life worth living, how she seeks to eliminate suffering at the end of her life, and how she sees herself as one fall away from having a bad death. Sheryl will describe a bad death as a death that is not gentle, with which Sheryl has unfortunately had many experiences. Sheryl's experience of prolonged, painful deaths include the death of her mother, brother, daughter, and husband. In this episode, we hear how each of those experiences impacted Sheryl as she considers her own end-of-life plan to take control of her life and therefore craft her own death. Sheryl's bravery, strength, creativity, and brilliance is unmistakable. It is important to note that Sheryl had made the decision to end her suffering and planned to take control of her own death before she approached us at the Completed Life Initiative about recording this interview. Sheryl requested that the family members in healthcare facilities mentioned in her story be omitted to protect their privacy. Names in today's episode will be censored with a low tone. Hi, Sheryl.
Hi, Sarah.
Welcome to the Completed Life podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. So I wanted to begin with the major influences throughout your life relating to dying a good or perhaps not so good death.
I developed 3 criteria for myself that I felt would indicate that time was near. One was that I would be able to continue to do the volunteer work that I was doing and contributing to society that way. The second was I love the house I'm in, that I live in, and I have a beautiful house and a beautiful yard. So the second one was that I would be able to continue to live independently in my house. I have hired some help for house cleaning, and but other than that, I do well by myself. And the third one was that I would be able to continue to maintain my garden and work in my garden, because that to me is my sanctuary, is my garden. I have a beautiful garden that's all Northwest natives. I have, this is a rental property, but the previous owner had done the planting, but I have the little kiwis. I have grapes, I have figs, I have persimmon, I have marionberries, raspberries. I mean, it's just, I go out there and eat in my yard. And then I have my vegetables and stuff, and it's just so much fun. I didn't find out about the Completed Life Initiative until maybe a month and a half ago. I was on the Final Exit website and saw a link there. And when I found it, I was oh my God, these people, they think like I do. And so that was a wonderful feeling. I think that, I've come up with completed life bits and pieces on my own, but they were very much like what you talk about, and the sense of fulfilling one's life, having a good life, having had a good life. Although that's not a requirement of the completed life, but I think I think that kind of thinking part of it. I wish I had discovered you a lot sooner and been able to compare notes. But on the other hand, I've found it very fulfilling to know that I wasn't just out here all by myself thinking up these things. So that's when I decided to send you the paper that I'd written and just see where it went from there. When I started thinking about really implementing things, the review of the family deaths was an important step for me to take. I'd never put it all down on paper or even, collected my thoughts on all this, but it was just an amazing, the whole process of doing this and looking at their individual deaths was so informative.
You write in great detail about the deaths of your beloved family members, starting with your mother in 1986 of metastatic breast cancer. It was heart-wrenching to hear her story and how you mentioned you had failed your mother. I was wondering if you could share more about her suffering with her cancer and what ways her death was a bad death in your eyes and her eyes.
Well, my mother, they didn't discover the breast cancer. Of course, this was, quite a few years ago. They didn't discover it until it had already spread into her body. And she was a very creative, independent woman. She'd studied chemistry and mathematics in college. When she got sick with breast cancer, she just basically spent most of her time in a recliner and in terrible pain, because the metastasized cancer had gone to her bones first, and then to her lungs, and then finally to her brain. And her suffering was just unbelievable, and it went on for like 4 years, which was hard to even imagine, really. And after maybe the second year, she asked me if I would put a pillow over her face and smother her because she couldn't take it anymore. And I was young, I can't remember, early 40s or something like that. And I was not knowledgeable I'd never really thought much about death or variations in kinds of death. So I was uninformed. I was young. I was afraid. I couldn't do it. And she said that there was nobody else for her to ask, that her other children and her husband would not be able to have done it, but that she thought that I was strong enough to, and understood her well enough to be able to. But I had to, every time we got together, she would bring this up again. And we lived on opposite coasts at the time. And so it wasn't all that often that I was there, but she would turn and ask me again. And I would have to say no, and it did feel like a real failure. And that's what made me determined not to ever accept that kind of experience for myself or anybody else that I had influence over, and sort of started me on this lifelong interest and determination. 4 years to die, and she was dying that whole time. Her body was in decline that whole time, and that's not a gentle death. That's not. I don't want to ever spend 4 years following that path.
In your writing, You contrast your mother's passing with the way your father passed relatively quickly and peacefully, and I was heartened to hear that your father didn't suffer in the same way as your mother. From your own perspective and experience of your father, how was it different? And was it perhaps preferable to how your mother died?
Yes. My mother had always had health issues her entire life, but my dad didn't. He was very healthy and strong body, strong mind. I don't think he ever had a prescription. He took a multivitamin, and he was a college professor. And I started thinking about what a good death would look like for my dad. And I had this sort of vision of him going out in the woods. He taught botany, and going out in the woods and looking for places to take his students, and getting a little tired and sitting down at the base of a big old oak tree and he had his puppies with him, and falling asleep. And that was it. And that was such a wonderful vision, as compared to what my mother went through. And he, in fact, did have a gentle death. He one evening, he wasn't feeling too good, so he called us three kids, my brother and sister as well, just to chat. And then the next morning, when he got up out of bed, he just collapsed. And I was so happy for him that he didn't have to go through a long process of dying, and that he was who he was right up till the end. And that just, he wasn't in a medical facility. He was in his own home, and it was just wonderful. That became my sort of definition of what a gentle death would look like in real life. Yeah.
Turning now to your mother-in-law and father-in-law and how they both received prolonged medical treatments that were not necessarily beneficial. What impacted you most about their end-of-life experience and the ways in which things went wrong with their care?
Well, my father-in-law was in his mid-80s, and he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And the family and the family physician all said, just keep him comfortable. Don't do surgery. Just keep him comfortable. But the surgeon refused their advice and their request and went ahead and did the surgery on this man. And he didn't live long after that. And it shows you what happens, what can happen. And when people get into a medical facility and lose control of what happens to their bodies, and somebody else is making decisions for them. And that just is a terrifying thought to me. Then my mother-in-law, she was pretty close to 90, I think. And she was in a assisted living situation, home. And she either had dementia or Alzheimer's. I don't know if they ever really figured out which one it was. It doesn't matter. But she'd been there for several years. And I started noticing a pattern on her bills from the nursing home of about every month or so. She'd be sent in an ambulance to the emergency room. They'd do extensive x-rays. They would diagnose her as having pneumonia. They would give her a massive antibiotic prescription and then send her back to the home in an ambulance. And then, like a month later, it'd be the same sequence of events again. And I don't know how many times it repeated, but it did repeat more than twice. And I pointed that out to her sons. They told the home to stop sending her to the hospital and to just let her die a natural death. But the family paid for all that. And the scary part, what I learned from that was they were putting profits over people. They were using her, or could have been using her, as a way of generating income for themselves and for the hospital. And that's just not right. My sense is that can happen a lot with older people, especially if they don't have family members that are checking on them all the time. I lived for a year back in Pennsylvania, and the stories you'd hear about that kind of thing going on back there were just amazing. And so, again, I learned that don't ever get into a situation where you lose your voice and what's going on.
Did your mother-in-law have an advance directive or DNR, a do not resuscitate form?
I don't really know. I think she must have had, because, once the sons spoke up, the way she was treated did change, but I don't know for certain.
Is it accurate to say they weren't necessarily respecting your mother-in-law's wishes to not keep going to the hospital?
Well, I don't think it was. I think she was beyond being able to express her wishes with the dementia. It probably didn't matter. She didn't probably understand it in the first place. So it was not until the pattern of billing appeared that the sons even knew that she was being sent that often.
Okay. That's an unfortunate but interesting thing to notice about the pattern, and I'm so glad that her boys noticed it and spoke up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It really illustrates how, in that process, she didn't have a voice.
You're listening to Voices of the Completed Life, a podcast brought to you by the Completed Life Initiative. Learn more about the Completed Life Initiative and donate to our cause at www.completedlife.org. We provide groundbreaking presentations about the right to control one's own end-of-life experience. We explore legislative options for expanding the eligibility criteria for medical aid in dying within the United States and look to other countries around the globe in support of the right to die. We empower people to ask, what does it mean to live a completed life? Spread the word about the completed life on social media by using #CompletedLife. And now, back to our episode.
It's clear how both your mother-in-law and father-in-law had bad experiences at the end of their life. When you wrote about your brother's experience, you said, a bad death affects not only the patient, but the survivors too. It sounds like, especially with, for example, your mother-in-law, and how her experience impacted her children, how your brother's experience impacted you and the rest of his family. In 2010, he died at age 65 from aggressive leukemia. How did your brother's death impact you, and what was the biggest takeaway from how he died?
My brother was he was 3 years younger than I was. So the shock of it, for one thing. And then he died. He lived in New Hampshire. And so his daughter, my niece, and I flew back to when we found out that he was in the hospital, but we didn't make it in time to talk to him. They had him on a heart and lung pump or whatever it's called. But it was, to me, it was really clear that he was already gone. I think they kept him on the heart and lung long enough for the family to start accepting the facts and realizing that he was gone, and then they pulled the plug on the machine. But going back to my brother, we don't know if he knew or not, or he may have not known and was keeping it secret to protect the family. There's just so many unknowns in that whole experience. My brother was a very well-liked, and he had incredible collection of antique cars, and he was, he was a very positive person, and it's sad to miss him. I miss him.
He sounds like a wonderful person. Sounds like a good brother.
Yeah, he was. My daughter, I had one child. My daughter and my second husband were born a day apart in March, and they died a day apart. So they were in hospice together at the same time. My husband had been diagnosed with mild dementia, and it got to a place where he was it was no longer safe to leave him at home alone. He needed to have someone with him. And so he moved to a assisted living center. And while he was there, he fell and broke his hip and was in surgery. And then they put him in a nursing home for rehab. And while he was in that facility, he got a really severe bed sore on the back of his heel. The infection went so deep it got into his bones. And so from the nursing center, he was put in to hospice in an adult residential house. He had wanted to be in the Death with Dignity program, but the minute he had been diagnosed with slight dementia, he was ineligible. So in other words, the demented are not worthy of having a dignified death. There's no way that he could have signed, a release or a request before he would, while he was still sound of mind, which I think is an important addition that needs to be made with the Death with Dignity program. So he was not eligible, but so he basically was left to rot in his bed. And I mean, it was horrible, absolutely horrible. I couldn't believe it. I could hardly bear to visit. And they kept assuring me that, he's not aware of pain and he's not aware of what's going on with his body, And of course, that's what I wanted to hear, but I don't trust that story anymore, because I bumped his foot once, by accident, and he let out a groan, and you could see it in his face. And he was feeling pain. And I don't trust what they say now. On a lot of things, I don't trust what people are saying.
Are there ways that the suffering at the end of your husband's life could have been prevented, or ways you wish the care team at the nursing home would have been more supportive or more gentle?
Well, I mean, the cause was the nursing home. As I understand, bed sores happen when the patients are not moved appropriately, so that doesn't ever occur. And so the nursing home was definitely at fault. And I had been told that particular nursing home was the best one available in the southern part of the state. So, oh my God, I can't imagine what the others are like. My daughter had pancreatic cancer, and she was in her 40s. She participated in Washington State's Death with Dignity program in hospice at home. So I got to see how that program worked. Her plan was to spend as much quality time as she could with her 2 children before her death. And then she wanted, when she was entering the final stages of life, she wanted to be able to take the medicine that would hasten the end, because she didn't want to have her children experience that part. There were so many problems in my mind with the way the Death with Dignity program was implemented. And it was implemented in a way that I consider it not a gentle death. There were requirements about the patient had to make 2 separate requests before they were even accepted into the program. They had to make 2 separate requests. The second request requirement, they were not informed of, the patients were not informed of that. And my daughter became increasingly disturbed that there was no responses coming from her first request. And she felt the pressure of time because she felt like she was going to be entering the later stages of death fairly soon. And she knew there was a long evaluation process. I had to go through several different doctors and it was going to take time. And felt like she was running out of time. And so she asked again, and that's what kicked off her participation in the program. How many people never get to that second, realize they have to ask twice? It's not published. Anyway, so then the second problem that was just so disturbing was if you are depressed and a participant in the Death with Dignity program, they will not issue you the prescriptions that you need at the end. So they started calling her and asking, "Are you depressed today? Are you depressed today?" And they basically terrorized her. I mean, she was so fearful that they would withhold. I mean, what's not to be depressed about dying and leaving 2 young children behind, And besides, she was in the hospice program because she had pancreatic cancer and was dying from that. It had nothing to do with depression. So to me, they were just even totally confused about why she was in hospice. But I was with her one day when she got the call about, "Are you depressed today?" And she was just so fearful. And why were they adding that on top of just dying? I just could not understand. Just far more concerned about covering their butts, their legal exposure, rather than concern about a dying patient. And it was terrible. To be fair, I later learned that all of those requirements that I mentioned, like the 2 requests and the depression, questioning if they're depressed, those are part of the law, the Death with Dignity law. I didn't understand that at the time, but I've done a lot of research on influence of the far right evangelicals, and my suspicion is that those are the kinds of issues that they were forcing into the Death with Dignity Act or law, and it makes that application of that law almost impossible. And I've seen data where a hospital or a program would report like 12 applications for Death with Dignity, but only 1 or 2 people actually take the prescription in the end. Well, what's happening in the middle? I mean, how I don't know how you work your way through that tunnel and maze in the middle. And I would love to know that data on that part. How many didn't know they had to ask twice? How many didn't, some of those other things. And so it left me with the final impression. I mean, I am a total supporter of Death with Dignity. Thank goodness we have that law, but get that religious stuff out of it. It has no business there, and it renders that law so ineffective. It so limits their scope of influence and relief that they can offer people who are dying. There's also some of the other requirements are you have to be terminally ill, and there's a list of acceptable illnesses, so it's not everybody, and that you have to be in a hospice program, which means you have to have 6 months or less to live. And so already they're leaving out huge blocks of the populace who would be interested in having assistance in dying. And I'm one of the ones that is left out. I've had several bad falls. Living independently is getting increasingly difficult. And I feel like I'm one fall away from being put off into a assisted living. So that's pretty terrifying. And I don't really have family that's close here. I have wonderful friends. You can ask a lot of a friend, but I feel like there are limits to what you can ask. And I don't have family that's close. And then in my garden, I can still do some things out there, but it's getting increasingly difficult. I could hire a gardener, but then what do I do? That was my activity. That was my love. And not just the garden, but my house. I love decorating, and my house is mostly decorated with stuff from the dump, as a matter of fact. But I love that creativity, and I like to do craft projects, mixed media projects. That's hard to do now too, because I've got a little bit of a shake in my painting hand, my right hand. I fell in I think it was April this year, and disjointed my right shoulder, and I'm so right-handed. It's my left hand has been having to take up a lot of that slack now. But then the rotator cuff is torn. They can repair the rotator cuff, but it means that I'd be 6 months in a sling with my right hand, my dominant and cherished right hand in a sling. And that's just not realistic for 80-year-olds. I mean, I'd probably come out of that with I would have physical therapy undoubtedly, but still, you probably never really come back from that. It's sort of akin to breaking your hip in a way. Then just in September, I fell again, and now I have a lower back injury, which makes things uncomfortable. So, it's just like my physical body. The shell is gotten very fragile. And frankly, I think COVID has being on lockdown for over a year now, semi-lockdown for part of that, has contributed. I think my muscle strength has lessened considerably as I wasn't out walking so much. And so I think that's been a problem too. And, my guess is, like I say, that I'm one fall away from no longer being able to be independent. So that puts me in a more urgent position for completing my life. I do not have a terminal illness. I'm not eligible for hospice. And there's other services that hospice provides that I'm not eligible for. I'm not eligible for some of the pain management techniques, some of the counseling. So what I learned from all of that was that I didn't want to participate in the Death with Dignity program as it's currently implemented.
You've just heard the first half of my conversation with Sheryl, an incredible woman who loved her garden and found joy in volunteer work. The painful, prolonged deaths that Sheryl witnessed throughout her lifetime confirmed what she already knew. She wanted to be independent in her choices at the end of her life and be able to take control of the timing of her own death. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we will hear the second half of Sheryl's incredible story about her completed life. If you wish to add your voice to our podcast with a perspective on a completed life, whether for yourself or a loved one, please email us at info@completedlife.org. Thank you.
This has been Voices of the Completed Life. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us at www.completedlife.org. That's completedlife.org. where you'll find extensive video content regarding resources on aid in dying, featuring discussions led by expert clinicians, bioethicists, policymakers, and end-of-life doulas. At the Completed Life Initiative, we advocate for a person's right to direct their own end-of-life care. Take control over your transition, your life, your choice.